Welcome to our webinar this morning. My name is Kate Charters and I'm the chair of SEGRA, the acronym for Sustainable Economic Growth for Regional Australia. SEGRA is recognised as Australia's most credible independent voice on issues affecting regional Australia. The topic Thriving Coasts CRC, which will drive economic growth and recovery and help advance the production in sustainable industries and build long-term resilience in Australia's vital coastal communities. So I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today. Unfortunately, our platform doesn't allow direct input from the audience. However, you'll note that there is a chat box and a Q&A down the bottom, and if you use either of those, we'll make our best efforts to see your questions and answer them as we move along. So as I say, today the overarching theme is Thriving Coasts, and it gives me much pleasure to welcome Paul here to start our conversation. Paul is the Chair in Urban Planning and Management at Griffith University, and he's also served as the Acting Director of the Griffith Climate Change Response Program. So quite a broad range there that you've got, Paul. So tell us a bit about what your project is and where you see it going into the future.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Kate, and thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to join you today. Yes, as Kate said, I work at Griffith University. I'm also director of the Cities Research Institute, so we do a lot of research on a wide range of issues affecting cities. And I was, until a year ago, a member of RDA Gold Coast, a founding member of RDA Gold Coast. So I was on that for a number of years. So I have an interest, a long-standing interest in regional matters, as well as what happens in big cities and metropolitan areas. And what I'm spending a lot of my time on at the moment is leading a team of colleagues from around the country, from 3 other universities, principally from University of Western Australia, from University of Adelaide, University of Sunshine Coast and Griffith University, and other colleagues like Angus, who will speak as well. And we are preparing a bid for a new cooperative research centre. So I won't go into a great deal of detail about these, but just suffice to say that this programme of Commonwealth government support for CRCs has been around for over 20 years now, since about 1990, in fact. And in total, they have supported something in the order of over 200 CRCs on a wide variety of topics, and have invested $4.5 billion worth of support over that time period. They put out a call every year for new CRCs, and we are responding to that call. We have until July to bring our bid together. It's a 2-stage process, so we make an initial submission by the end of July. The government, the panel that the government has set up to review these, then selects a smaller number to go through to stage 2. And then they make announcements, I think at the end of this year, about successful ones. So we're still in that bid stage. So what are we focusing our bid on? Well, after much internal discussion, we've decided to call it Thriving Coasts, to capture, I guess, two critical aspects. One, which is that our coastal zones contain much of the economic activity that goes on in Australia and houses most of the population. Most of us, we know, live in cities of varying sizes and scales, and most of those cities and towns and other settlements are in coastal areas. So most of us, we live, we work, we play, we study, notwithstanding that we might now be doing it at home. Home is in this coastal zone. And that coastal zone, and we're not being too precious about the definition of it. I mean, it extends as far inland as we need it to, depending on what we're interested in. But that zone is becoming increasingly congested and a contested space. So because we like living in that area or those areas, there are significant population pressures to accommodate a growing population. That's where we need to create jobs. That's where a lot of our jobs exist already. Whether they have a particularly coastal flavour to them or not is another matter. So this congested and contested space is becoming increasingly difficult to manage, and for us to secure, if you like, the good life that we all seek, and a good life being a nice place to live in a pleasant environment with good employment opportunities for ourselves and our children, and good infrastructure. So we know that the big challenges that are facing Australian cities generally are typically the challenges of coastal cities, and to a lesser extent in terms of the scale of other smaller coastal settlements. So that's what this CRC is focusing on. It's looking at how we can stimulate economic growth and now economic recovery in this congested space that both allows and encourages and supports innovation, at whether that's in terms of businesses or community organizations, or indeed in the ways in which governments go about their work and their business, and to do that in perhaps a more integrated manner. Now, Angus and others have told me that the notion of better integrated coastal management and planning is an idea that's not new by any means. It's been around for a very long time. One of the big challenges has always been to turn the good intentions of more integrated coastal management and planning into practice, to make it a reality. So we're hoping that this CRC will help kickstart that. Just finally, before I stop at this point, just to say that if you don't know, cooperative research centres provide an opportunity to essentially kind of double the value of the input of partners. So CRCs are industry-led, although at this stage most of this initial preparatory work is being coordinated by myself and colleagues in universities. But if we are successful, a successful CRC is an independent entity governed by an independent board who drive what we do. So it's industry-led. It involves partners making contributions to a pool of funds that, if we are successful, the Commonwealth then matches. So it's a way of doubling the impact of one's investment in this program. The programs typically extend over 10 years. That's the time horizon that we're looking at, and we're looking to assemble all up a fund of upwards of 100 million. The final thing I'd say is that although it's focused on research and development, industry-driven research and development, not just the research that we academics think might be a good idea that we then try and present to the world at large, but industry-driven, industry covering a multitude of entities, not just commerce, but government and community industries as well. But we're also, there's a key element which is to do with workforce training and development. So as well as that R&D focus, there's also an emphasis that says, look, the people that are going to indeed carry out research and development in the future, but put it into practice, translate it into practice and apply it in terms of economic growth and development, will need training and upskilling. So there's an important element of our our work that's about specialised training and education as part of workforce development. I think I'll stop there, and then you and others can ask questions, and we can amplify as necessary.
Paul, I've got a question in the sense, particularly in relation to COVID, because I know your preparation of this bid's been, a year or two in the making, but I'm just wondering, how has COVID impacted on your bid? What sort of changes? Obviously, I've noticed it's mentioned in your document now, so you've obviously thought it has an impact. What are the specific things that are affecting you?
Sure, thanks, Robert. So as you say, we haven't only just started working on this. I wasn't closely involved in it, but a bid was assembled last year that went in under the heading with the title of Productive Coasts and Industries, led by the University of Adelaide, still one of our partner collaborating universities. That was unsuccessful. We didn't make it through to round 2 on that occasion. So at the end of last year, we thought, well, do we go again with a revised bid, taking into account the feedback that we had from the review panel? And we thought, yes, we would do that, but it was going to be a bit different. So Adelaide stepped back from the leadership role, Griffith stepped into the leadership role, and I was asked to take on this role. So my heavy involvement has only been from the start of this year. And yes, soon after I was invited to take on that role, then we started hearing about something coming out of China. So yes, we have. I think we had a couple of local meetings face to face in January and maybe early February, but our bid team at the moment, as I say, from 4 universities, we meet online. I probably meet one or more, or some of them every day. Some of them, my colleagues from Griffith, I've met. The others, I've never met face to face. So we're conducting our business online, like everybody else. We've become very quickly familiar and reasonably adept with Zoom, Teams, and other platforms. I think what's interesting about that is that, I think I'm quite lucky. I'm speaking to you now from the shed at the bottom of my garden, and it's a well-appointed shed. It's probably slightly better appointed than my office at Griffith, so it's no great hardship for me to be working at home. My internet connection is reasonable. I've got a good desk, it's comfortable, and everything else. I don't mind having these engagements online, and when I think about how it would be if COVID hadn't hit, I'd have been flying backwards and forwards between Perth and Brisbane and Brisbane and Adelaide. And in retrospect, I don't think that would have been the best use of my time, and it would have done certainly nothing for my carbon footprint. So I think that this has, prompted us to work differently. We're now in the process of going out and engaging with prospective partners, some of whom were with us last time around, some of whom we're approaching for the first time, and that's being done online. I mean, I'd probably say that's not ideal. It's still probably better to have some of those kind of conversations face to face, but that's impossible at the moment. I mean, the other big impact, obviously, is that, at this stage, we're in the process of, as I say, trying to sign up partners, and to become a partner, you have to make a commitment. It can be, ideally, it's a commitment of cash. It is possible to make in-kind commitments, but at the end of the day, we need a pot of money to have a plausible and viable bid. And now is not as good a time to be going and asking people for money as it was last year. But, the program is going ahead. The government didn't cancel the program. And I think our view is that, yes, it's difficult. It means that we have to be much more clear in terms of the kind of value propositions that we're making, that in itself is no bad thing. But, you know, people haven't got as much money, and the money that they have is perhaps being redirected to things that they weren't anticipating spending on a year ago. So it's more challenging times, but that's the way it is.
Look, certainly you speak to my heart, Paul, when you talk about CRCs, because SEGRA is very committed as well to bringing together the best research knowledge, academic knowledge, policy and practice. And so CRCs very much align with that. I might turn to Angus now, because he is in fact an epitome of part of this. Angus is the Chief Executive Engineer at International Coastal Management, a small to medium enterprise providing coastal engineering consultancy services in Australia and internationally. But I understand that he's been liaising with Griffith Uni to help develop an environmentally friendly reef breakwater solution, and we know that our reefs around the world are in grave danger, and so solutions that support our reefs are very important, and certainly important in Queensland. Though I note 85% of the Australian population lives within 110 kilometres of the coast. So if you go to Alice Springs, they tell you they're nearest to every beach in Australia. Anyway, Angus, you're passionate about keeping Australians' innovation culture alive, bringing universities, industry and government together. Tell us a bit about your project and your breakwater solutions. You're on mute, Angus. Angus, you're on mute.
Thank you, Kate. I was very settled in there listening to Paul handling it very well. I was hoping I wouldn't have to work too hard. I've spent half my working life in local government, half my, well, a bit more than half as a consultant. And I think just about every innovative project I've done, including this reef project, we've involved academia. And my role in this bid is to act as a link between industry and the academics and the universities, because a lot of the things that we've done in Australia we couldn't have done without the university. I mean, this reef project that you mentioned, it was in Dubai. I turned it down 3 times because the timeline and the parameters were just too hard. I had to talk to Professor Tomlinson, Roger Tomlinson at Griffith, and we decided that if we just stepped out of the box, we could do it. And I think, I'll just go sideways a bit here. I think COVID is actually an opportunity for Australia. I think we've got a bit complacent. I think we've had money. I think Australians, and I like this project, we work best when we're under pressure. And we really work well. And that's why the Arabs in the Middle East love our product, which is advice on coastal management. It's expensive because we use high quality employees. We fly in, fly out. But so in this project, the reef project, the day the gear was arriving on site, and 25 tonne of that was air freighted in from Australia. And again, I'll go sideways here. I remember sitting in a meeting with our clients going, your timeline's too hard. And then I said, the only way we could do this is get quality product from Australia, and we could air freight it. We made a couple of phone calls, gave them a price of $250,000 extra to air freight. They just said yes. Yeah, we were still well under the traditional answer of rock. We were offering mega sandbags produced near the Gold Coast. And the day that work and the gear was arriving on site, I was standing in the wave tank in Sydney with Professor Tomlinson and Professor Cox doing the final design, and these guys giving me the value added. And it's, as I say, in my career, this being able to deal with universities has just made the difference between a risky, sort of project that hadn't been proved, and one that is proof tested right back at well, in my case, basic engineering. But the work we do we've done a lot of work recently with the Griffith Centre for Coastal Management. Now, about a year or so ago, Roger and I gave a presentation at a university near Dubai, and we've been working in Qatar. It's just, they bring on board not only the engineers, it's coastal management, not coastal engineering, they bring on board the marine biologists, the business people, the economic, the science, and that's where we have this advantage. So as I slow down in my business life, I'm very keen to promote the research on the CRC scale, because we really do need to reboot after COVID in a different way. There's many paradigms along the coast, and there's many borders. I mean, the rules 30 kilometres away from where I'm sitting on the Gold Coast in New South Wales are very, very, very different to the ones in Queensland. We also work in other states, and each one of them has their own ways of doing things. And we need, coastal processes don't respect borders. And one of the big projects we did, and again, I'll mention Griffith University, without them, we couldn't have got the Tweed Sand Bypass up and running. That was a major cooperative project between Queensland and New South Wales. Now, that was driven by Gold Coast City Council, because the problem was, at that stage I was working for Gold Coast City, and the problem was on our doorstep. I mean, if you go to Kira at the moment, there's huge beaches, and people complain that they're too wide. I love hearing that, because before we started that project, there were waves coming over the rock wall onto the highway at Kira. And I remember one cyclone where I had to stop while a rock was thrown across the road in front of me, and there was white water on the highway. Again, you use the word passionate. I am passionate about the link between universities and that. I've identified many problems in industry that I've been sailing past the universities, and we can solve them and bring Australia back to being innovative, leading. We are there, but I think we're losing it, because we have the other countries starting to edge away at us on price, and I don't think we should be giving up on price. I think we should be maintaining our quality. And again, I keep talking to the universities about the type of graduates we're getting. So I think that probably fairly well covers broadly where I'm at.
Yep, no, that's great, thanks. Look, I'd like to follow up something on a bit more practical approach, in the sense of the impact of COVID on regional coastlines, tourism, and with climate change, we're talking rising sea levels. And it seems that COVID now has put another layer of complexity on redefining what even might be coastal development opportunities that are viable. If we're not getting overseas tourists for 2 years that are all cashed up, that fund expensive resorts, if we're talking drive tourism that's domestic, it's clearly a smaller market with a different price point. Is there an opportunity for innovation there and rethinking our product in a time that we've got the reef bleaching, rising sea levels, and now COVID destroying our very simplistic international tourism supply chain? What does that mean?
I think it's a huge opportunity, because it's made us step back. It's given us a pause, because previously, climate change was too hard. Most governments are pushing it down onto local government, and they just don't have the resources, and on a regional scale, to deal with such a big problem. So on climate change, I think we've got to ramp this up to a federal level. The CRC gives us that opportunity to have a whole of Australia view on it, and approaches. Now, if we can get, and we will, get guidelines out of the CRC to help it, it makes everyone's, we don't have to reinvent the wheel 1,000 times around the coastline. We can get guidelines that apply to it all. There are different areas. The barrier reef has different problems, but that's the detail. But that's why there's a number of universities with different outlooks. You talk about tourism, and I think, what I've never really understood is how our Great Barrier Reef resorts have continually been in problem. They're obviously not quite right for the market that's developed. I think we need to stand back. I think there's a lot of Australians who have never been to the Great Barrier Reef but have been to Bali or wherever, just on cost point. Perhaps we need to, well, even one closer to Sydney, Port Stephens. I mean, wonderful dolphin watching experience that is enjoyed mostly by Asians. Do Australians know about that? Is it pitched at them? I mean, I think this coastal CRC bringing in the business side as well, because I think we've had this discussion, Robin, more than a few times. Everything has to be underpinned by a business case. And I think the business case just changed. But again, as Australians, I think it's an opportunity to reboot and get rid of some of the old paradigms, direct and build again from the domestic market, because we've been losing the domestic market. And that goes back, I mean, the first time I saw that was in '67 after the cyclones on the Gold Coast. Gold Coast had a fairly stable market, Sydney and Melbourne. Every holiday we had tourists come up, drive up, book into the same place. Suddenly we lost our beaches in '67, and Australians started to discover Fiji, etc., and Bali. And we lost that market, and suddenly we had to rely on the international market. It seems to me that if we can reappeal and reprice to the domestic market, our coastline might be more sustainable rather than very expensive resorts for a few overseas. We need to relook at what we're doing. I mean, climate change, I mean, I'm a coastal engineer. I work in a floating office. I reckon I've got it nailed. But present rules and planning, sorry, Paul, don't allow that sort of, well, it's a Dutch approach really, is, the sea will come up, just go up with it.
Okay, well, I've got a question to bounce back to Paul, actually, in the sense that, isn't it interesting in our culture, this island continent, so much coastline, most of us live there, it doesn't seem to be the specialty of Australia's expertise or business. And I wonder, with where you see things going as far as the emerging of the blue economy, and the fact that we've got, even though we've got cities on the coastline and we've got regional cities, there's a lot of regional coastline as well. I mean, is it a time for Australia to be known for its expertise in coastal management and living? I mean, your thoughts on that? It's a strange thing about, we are an island, but their coastline seems a bit invisible from a skills and management point of view.
I think you're absolutely right. You may tell that I wasn't born and bred in Australia. I came from the UK 13 years ago, and I'd been to Australia once before, and my perception, kind of crude and unsophisticated perception, was that, Australia was the big red centre. It was all kind of desert and red dirt and stuff like that. And I still have colleagues, and friends back in the UK who are saying, apropos COVID, they're going, but you've only got 24 million people in this massive continent. I go, well, but no, I mean, not nobody, but pretty much nobody lives in the middle. We all, we live in a few places around the edge, and the middle's empty. So it's kind of, it's slightly misleading. So I think you're absolutely right. It's, as I said at the outset, most of us, but the vast majority of us live, work, play, do everything that we do in the coastal zone. But I think we kind of take it for granted. Interestingly, Angus made a couple of references to kind of Dutch engineering expertise, and they would be seen, you know, and have been for a very long time as being one of the kind of epicenters of that knowledge and expertise globally. But I think, I mean, I was at a conference there in the old days when we used to go overseas to conferences a couple of years ago, and they're winding back some of the things that they're renowned for in terms of coastal engineering. They're depolarizing parts of the landscape around Amsterdam because they recognize that it's no longer viable. It made sense and it worked for them for 100 years or more, but it's not working now, and they're winding back some of those things. So the kind of traditional Dutch approach to a lot of these things, I think, is being questioned, not least by them, but also by coastal engineers like Angus and my colleague Roger Tomlinson, who Angus mentioned, and others around Australia. So I think there is an opportunity there. I mean, I think also, yes, that we have got to take this opportunity to seriously rethink some of the assumptions about how we work and what works for us and what might work in the future. So when I used to go to work every day, it was on the Gold Coast. Gold Coast renowned for its theme parks and beaches. And I have to wonder whether, you know, building another theme park that's devoted to some new character, you know, from a mega movie is the way of the future. Not least because anyone can do that pretty much anywhere around the world. You know, you can build a great big shed on an empty block of land on the edge of town and fill it with, you know, Disney characters or Marvel characters or whatever. You're not making the most of your geographic advantages, and I think we need to, you know, and people have been talking about this for some time, so it's not absolutely new, but saying, well, actually, you know, there is more to the coastline than the Great Barrier Reef. There are other reefs, there are other coastlines that are spectacular and could attract visitors, but in a different format, in different numbers. They're going to be wanting different kinds of experiences. So a key element of what we're doing is about tourism and the regeneration of tourism. We'll be looking at that because obviously that's taken a massive hit. We'll be looking at the consequences both for tourism and for logistics of our ports, including seaports and airports, because that's how, you know, tourists come in and out, but that's how, you know, raw materials are processed and then exported or moved around the country. So looking at port development and how we can better integrate modern port facilities with the onshore processing and logistics activities as well. That's why I said we don't have too precious a view on, you know, the coastal zone only extends 10 kilometers and that's it. We won't consider anything beyond that, because we have to look at, well, okay, to make some of our ports more effective, you've got to have, you know, good rail connections. You know, it's the future does not, in my view, lie in continuing to truck everything around the country in big trucks on roads that we share with cars, even if those cars might be more autonomous in the future. So we're looking at that. We're looking also at how we protect and preserve our natural environments that are valuable in themselves, but are also valued as attractors of tourists and as the places that we are attracted to when we say we want a good lifestyle and we want to live in a nice place. I mean, I'm an urban planner, so sometimes I might say that's a built environment, but typically it's the natural environment, including the coastal environment. So in doing all of this, it's essential that we don't destroy the very habitats that make our places attractive and indeed viable. So we've got colleagues who are experts in mangroves and their use, perhaps in coastal protection. So again, in contrast to some of the traditional slightly disparaging, but the kind of, the Dutch engineering solutions, which is to kind of build seawalls and hard concrete structures, albeit ones that maybe float and are flexible. We will be looking at ways to protect our coastlines and our coastal environments with natural features rather than, on the Gold Coast, we've got more canals than Venice. And our big challenge coming up over the next 10 to 20 years is that the revetment walls that line the canals are coming to the end of their useful lives and are going to have to be renovated and restored. And who does that and how they do it is a major challenge in a place like the Gold Coast. But what we learn from that can be applied anywhere else where you've got man-made walls like that.
Yeah, bouncing off that those comments, Paul, I'll probably direct this at Angus, because what's come out in a lot of our conversations in the last few weeks is particularly more local supply chain and localising the product, even the tourism product, getting more resilience and diversity. And I'll throw this to you, Angus, in a sense, because that seems to be moving closer to something that you might call eco-engineering, this collaborative, hard, soft environment that's productive. Is that, and when we think from what Paul had said, we look back on engineering in the past as pretty hard and brutal and interventionist in the natural forces. What are your thoughts on moving forward? Have we the capacity to move into some more sort of eco-engineering that's more multi-dimensional in its benefits compared to the way we've approached it in the past?
Definitely, and we need to, because one of the great strengths and attractions of Australia is our environment. Now, we can't afford to develop over the top of that. We need to include it, and Australians are developing that. And you talk about exporting these skills. We've actually exported our skills to the Netherlands. We used them in the 60s and 70s, but increasingly, Australians have learned from the Dutch and coming up with softer solutions. Now, the Dutch have gone soft, but some of that they've actually taken from the Gold Coast, which I would consider, one of the world's largest and most innovative coastal engineering laboratories. Now, Gold Coast doesn't take risks, and again, it's that link with the academics is to make sure that innovation can be less risk. But we are heading. It's interesting. We get approached by recently 2 proposed mega cities in Saudi that will be coastal. They're going to build on basically desert against the Red Sea. But they're looking to Australians. But in Australia, we're increasingly getting unable to implement innovative works because our Australian clients go, tell us where it's been done before. So our strategy has been to propose things in Australia first. If they aren't accepted here because there aren't 3 examples where this innovative new idea has been used, we tend to implement it overseas and then come back and use it as a tried and tested. I think post-COVID and also local government, state governments tend to import expertise from overseas when it's here. And that I don't understand. At a higher, they're willing to pay a premium for overseas advice that often is just taking from what Australians have done. So that I'm hoping will change in that, as you say, the supply chains, including consultancy and other advice, will be more local. Gold Coast is just about to do a big project with a Western Australian firm, but they can't get here now, whereas we have the expertise on the Gold Coast to do it. It's, as I say, I think we do need to relook at the supply chains, because often we might be looking at a 5% cheaper overseas, perhaps Chinese product or Indian consultancy, whereas it ends up, if you cut there, you end up paying more in the long term. And short and medium term as well. Did that help with your question, Rob?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on a bit more now, zoom into some practical stuff, and maybe it's sort of engineering flexibility, because I'm wondering, Angus, if we're now moving into post-COVID, which has definite impact on some of the business models, is one thing, but we're also, before that happened, had the climate change of dealing with more regular storm events, rising sea level, but even then that affects tourism. I mean, are we really needing to move into a different form of engineering and solutions that obviously is more resilient or flexible, more multidimensional? I mean, what are the sort of practical things you could envision might emerge to solve this post-COVID climate change scenario on the coast?
Okay, so sea level rise along the coast, we've got a number of ways we can approach that. We can retreat, but that's not all that easy. But it's not that hard to protect the coast, and I don't mean by hard structures. I mean, we've got 30 kilometres of seawall along the Gold Coast, which is buried because we actually widened the beaches. And we first talked about sea level rise back in the mid-80s. Since then, the Gold Coast has actually been beating sea level rise. Our beaches haven't been narrowing as they would without management. I mean, we need to manage our coastline. It's no longer virgin, undeveloped, unaffected, coastline. Just about everywhere there's man-made influences. But one of the things we've been working with and exporting overseas is the concept of submerged reefs along the coastline. Now, we know North Queensland has fairly sort of mild wave conditions along the beaches. That's because the Great Barrier Reef mitigates the waves. So we never get the 14-metre waves off the North Queensland coast that we get off the Gold Coast and the New South Wales coast, because those waves break offshore. So what we've been doing, and Gold Coast implemented the first reef project back in 2000 off Narranac as a prototype. And again, Griffith Centre for Coastal Management were very involved in that, plus about 2 overseas universities, another couple of Australian universities. I think there was more universities involved in that project than consultants. And that was because it was new. But it is now the benchmark for the world, and there's been a number of these reefs done. The way they work is they break the waves. So even if we get some sea level rise, we're not getting the wave. So sea level rise plus waves is the problem. So we got the water level going up, we get a storm, it cuts back more on the coast. If you can take, say, 10%, 20%, even 30% off that maximum wave height during a cyclone, suddenly you don't have that storm cut. And that's what we found at Narranac Reef, just north of Surfers Paradise. That beach, well, there wasn't a beach there, there was a rock wall. And, great car park, it was a great view of the ocean, but it wasn't any good for surfing. It also cut off the 7-kilometre walk that you could take from Surfers up to the Gold Coast Seaway and back, which a lot of tourists and residents did in the morning. So now we have about a 50-metre wide beach there. Now that was a very low cost. In those days, 2000, I think it was less than $2 million. And the business case on that was about an ROI of about 50 to 1. So it's a no-brainer. And we're actually exporting that technology. Gold Coast has just put in their second artificial reef for coastal protection at Palm Beach. New South Wales looking at it, but not convinced yet. Certainly we had one designed in Dubai, but it suddenly got reclaimed in one of their famous islands, the site. But going back to the reefs, one spin-off that we did find from the Narranac Reef was the material we used, which again was a geotextile to make huge 300-ton sandbags. So we weren't bringing in rocks from a quarry, digging holes, trucking rocks through suburbs, loading them onto barges, shipping them out. We were taking a very small vessel, with empty sandbags that had only come 20 kilometres at the most. They were filled with sand off the coast, filled, and now we have 70,000 cubic metres of reef out there. But the material is a good substrate for marine growth. And what we've found is that it's become one of the most popular fishing spots on the Gold Coast. It's an artificial reef. It's close to you can swim off the beach, you can snorkel out there, but it's also a breeding area for prawns, crabs, other juvenile fish. So not only we protected that section of coast, but we're also providing more habitat that's been lost for our prawning industry, for our fishing industry, our recreational fishing industry. So yeah, to answer your question, as engineers, and again, I'm greatly, the first time I saw this habitat that we didn't expect growing on Narranac, we called in the academics and said, as engineers, we don't understand what's happening here. Please advise. And I think there's been over 100 papers, both engineering and biological, written on Narranac Reef in top journals. It is one of the leading coastal engineering projects in the world, right on our doorstep. And we are exporting that, but we have trouble selling it in Australia.
Okay, well, maybe a final question then for Paul, because it comes back to innovative business development. And I'm just wondering, in the CRC, how, because this would be a challenge. I mean, one is collecting information from an academic point of view, but then how do we actually encourage innovative businesses, particularly post-COVID, climate change? I could see a CRC having a huge opportunity to be a catalyst, but for innovative business. How do you push, sort of ignite that catalyst for business through the CRC?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. That's a great point. I mean, I suppose fundamentally it goes back to the fact that this is designed to be an industry-led research and development initiative. It's not the more traditional model where we academics sit there and think, this would be a really interesting research project. I'll get some funding for it and then complete the work and then go out with my findings and approach business and say, have I got some interesting results for you? And at which point the businesses either go, well, you may think they're interesting, but they're not to us. Or if only you'd spoken to me 5 years ago when you designed your project, you could have tweaked it a little bit and made it really relevant. So we're approaching it in a very different way, which is to say, in a sense, you know, we're not in the driving seat. We come up collaboratively with research projects, and they are research and development projects. So it's the end product is not just a set of papers in academic journals that nobody but academics read. It's all about translation. So we can do, you know, in our spare time, we publish in the academic journals, but the key outputs are to work to translate research findings into practically valuable measures for industry in the traditional sense, but also government. So one of the things I'd just say is that, yeah, so it's partly about working with existing industries manage that transition to a new and more challenging business environment. It's also about helping, you know, the startups who go, well, I've never worked in this field before, but I see a really great opportunity here to, and especially to combine, as Angus said, to go, well, actually, if you're putting geotech sandbags down in order to dissipate wave energy, is there an opportunity to grow fish and harvest fish around them? And if so, what do we then do rather than just shipping that fish offshore to be processed and then re-imported? So the fish that I buy in Coles and Woolies is all from Vietnam, or it's been to Africa to be gutted and filleted and processed and then shipped back again. So keeping it more in-house and looking at opportunities and helping those kind of small startups develop, but also government. And I suppose the final point I'd make is about, and I'm conscious about the scale of government. So yeah, we talked a lot about, because that's where we're based, the Gold Coast, second largest council in the country. You know, their annual budget is $1.4 billion, right? They're massive. I've got a colleague who used to be the deputy CEO for Croydon Shire in far north Queensland, place the size of Belgium, has got a population of under 300 people. You know, there was her husband was the CEO, and, you know, another couple, one answered the phone and one graded the roads, and that was it, you know. So their capacity to do anything beyond that is quite limited. Gold Coast employs more, you know, highly qualified flood engineers than anyone else. You know, they'll be bigger than the entire planning departments of some councils. So I think one of the things that we're focused on is scalability and partnership. So recognizing that whilst Gold Coast, I mean, okay, they're financially challenged in different ways, even though they're huge, but you know, they would still retain the capacity to do things that smaller regional coastal councils on their own could not do. So one of the things we'll be looking at is how, and it's not to say where that doesn't happen now, because of course it does, but you know, associations or collaborations between smaller councils that can pool their resources and then invest in some of these developments. And finally, also to think about the regulatory environment. That's, I think, absolutely critical, as Angus touched a bit on. At the moment, you know, like many other things, that, you know, the coastal zone can be a place where good ideas go to die, because the regulatory hurdles put up unintentionally by a range of, you know, local, state and federal bodies can make it just impossible. And people who've tried once or twice might just go, you know, I'm not going to bother. I mean, that's dreadful. We've got to do something about not having a bonfire of the regulations. It's not assuming that every form of regulation is absolutely unnecessary and we can get rid of it. But it now has surely got to be the time for a more rigorous and systematic review of our regulatory frameworks, whereby we sit down and we go, we need to keep this, because otherwise we run the risk of you know, some very harmful outcomes and long-term impacts. But these things that we've been doing them for years because that's the norm. Do we really need to do that? Because it takes 6 months and it costs, you know, a proponent $50,000 worth of consultants' fees. I mean, it's not good for the consultants if we streamline that. But, you know, to get innovation, to stimulate innovation and to translate that into good practice on the ground, we need more nimble and streamlined processes. So again, in anything that we do, everything that we do, we'll try and ensure that it's of practical value, it's translatable, it's relevant to industry, to government, to community groups, and it's not just an academic exercise.
Mm.
Thank you, Paul. And certainly the coastal regions are becoming increasingly complex, congested and contested as our population grows. And I'm very much looking forward to a CRC getting going. We've just got one comment here from Pat Mackle, who's saying, I wish this technology was available in Apollo Bay at Great Ocean Road. Angus, I thought if you gave your email address, then people who wanted to contact you about the technology could do so. So can I just get you, Angus, to give your email address?
What's the easiest one? Angus at coastalmanagement.com.au.
Angus at coastalmanagement.com.au. Well, that's all we have time for today. We unfortunately regularly run out of time in these sessions, but we must bring it to a close. So thank you very much to both Angus and Paul for your presentation today. I found it very interesting and exciting. Now, there'll be no webinar next Wednesday, as the RAI are running a Regions Rising webinar at 10:30 till 11:30, which you might like to attend. So we won't be running a webinar next Wednesday, but next Friday we'll be running one on the 29th, where we'll be unpacking some of the key issues and action agendas that have emerged during this process. So I look forward to people joining us then. If you have any questions that you'd like to address to me, my email is kate@segra.com.au and Robert's is robert@vitalplaces.com.au. So once again, thank you very much for your contributions and enjoy the rest of your day.